FilthyRobot here, just about to start the breakdown of the Baldur Gate 3 classes, and wanted to remind you all that we do not have complete information for this quite yet. A number of these classes are in the game, but only up to level 5 as part of early access, and a number of these classes are not, or subclasses rather, are not yet in the game at all. So the information I'm going to provide to you guys is a little bit of data mine stuff collected on websites, a little bit of my own D&D knowledge going into this, a little bit of previous subclasses, and a little bit of the information released on the games. What this means is some of these things are going to be a little bit inaccurate. Some things that are reported as an action might be a bonus reaction. Some of the things that happen in normal mechanics of D&D may not apply to the Baldur's Gate 3 game. They may have tweaked these engines a little bit. Where I notice these differences or where I can see them, I'm going to try to highlight them. And when I think these are going to have implications on how the character plays, I'm going to mention that. But just a caveat that not all of this information will be exactly accurate because of the sources that we're drawing from. All right, let's talk about the Baldur's Gate 3 Paladin class and subclasses. So Paladins are generally pretty sweet in D&D 5e. They are a D10 HP, which is the second best dice for that. Wisdom, Charisma, basic saves, saving proficiencies rather, which Wisdom is quite a good one. Charisma is a little bit more situational, but it's still a decent number of saves for that in the generic D&D game. We'll have to see what that actually means in Baldur's Gate 3. It's going to be dependent on what they choose for that. But still not as good as Con for any of the casting classes. They are half casters, which means they do gain spell slots and spell progression, just not at the same rate as the full casters. And Paladins get access to heavy weapons, so martial weapons and simple weapons, heavy armor, medium armor, light armor, shields. And the whole shebang for equipment that you can get, which makes them pretty good. By and large for that. They're a little bit harder to multi-spec in, requiring both charisma and strength, I believe, to multi-spec in and out of. They tend to utilize the kind of cleric style spells, so a lot of shielding and healing and anti-undead kind of stuff. They get a number of specific features to paladins that are really kind of unique and quite good. So as they progress, they get Lay on Hands, which is a pool of energy that you can heal with, cure diseases with, and occasionally fuel class-specific stuff for, like subclass-specific stuff for. Generally just a really flexible source of either extra healing, picking people up in combat, or removing some of the annoying stuff. Divine Sense tends to be an absolute troll. This is like when you're fighting undead, you can sense if they're undead, which tends to not be the most efficient use of your time. But hypothetically, you might be able to ascertain if some creature that you're talking to is in fact a undead or spiritual or what is it? Not radiant. What's the angelic entity or this type of thing, right? That you can do through Divine Sense, but generally not that interesting. They get fighting styles at 2, so they get a fairly restricted set of fighting styles. I think it's just like Great Weapon Mastery or Great Weapon Fighting Style, Protection Fighting Style, Dueling, and Defensive, if I remember correctly. So not as many as the fighter, but still a pretty good set of melee and combat-oriented fighting styles. Smite is one of the sweetest things that Paladins get, which is they can choose to expend spell slots to do an extra set of dice. Oftentimes you can make the Smite decision after your attack roll and hit. So you attack to hit, and then you see what you hit with, and you decide if you want to smite. So this is particularly nice for criticals, where the smite dice are doubled as well as the damage dice off your weapon attacks. And they get standard melee progression of their second attack at 5, and then the normal feat progression at 4, 8, 12, etc. All in all, a pretty solid class. And when you start adding in the subclass stuff, which tends to be some additional mechanical stuff as well as an expanded spell list, they tend to be pretty good. Often primarying either, you can build Dex Paladins, but it's much more common to do Strength Paladins, so they're almost always focused Strength, Constitution, and Charisma, which is their spellcasting attribute. You can often get away with dumping Charisma fairly low on Paladins, especially if you're doing smites or other spells that don't require breaking the enemy's spell DC, or that don't require spell DC to be relevant. So anything that doesn't require a resistance roll on enemies is often a good type of spell to utilize on Paladins, so you don't have to raise Charisma as high as you might have to otherwise. They can be faces of the party. In the past, I've found that Paladins are more fun when the DM is a little loose with the interpretation of the oath. The oath feature of Paladins tends to be how they subspec. They choose a certain oath. That oath tends to have tenets with it. Paladins are supposed to adhere to those tenets, and if they don't, they can lose the blessing and therefore the power of their gods. It looks like Baldur's Gate 3 has chosen to play into this quite heavily, offering some Oathbreaker effects, which are supposedly going to make you lose access to some of your Paladin features. Unclear which ones. I remember that being extremely penalizing in pen and paper, but I can't remember which version that the last time that has happened to me has been in. So maybe we get the best of both worlds in Baldur's Gate 3, where if we roleplay as the Paladin Oath that we're supposed to be playing as, then we keep our subclass stuff and get all of our progression. But if we don't, we lose some set of that to get access to some other abilities. Might make for some interesting playthroughs and some interesting replayability. I don't want to go too far into the later stuff because the later stuff is still TBD, determined based entirely on what Baldur's Gate 3 is going to implement. But Paladins also tend to get auras a bit later, and the auras are often somewhat related to subclass, as well as the core auras that you get as Paladins are often very strong. It makes a very nice support damage dealing kind of class for the team that sometimes also tanks depending on how you build them. I really like Paladins. They tend to be just nice and flexible for a lot of the things you want. They can take hits, they can deal damage, they can be contributing to the skill check stuff. They often have spells that are relevant, etc. All right, let's take a look at the 3 subclasses they're offering. They're offering, I should have done it from this one. 4, excuse me. Devotion, Ancients, Oathbreaker, and Vengeance. If Oathbreaker is a subclass, I was interpreting this as a, maybe this is the subclass you become if you do things that are outside of your oath. We'll see. So maybe it's not really a subclass that you choose, more as you choose via your actions and then have those effects. I'm not finding a lot of information on these subclasses, and the information I'm finding right now seems pretty limited in terms of what they're doing. So the Oaths of Devotion subclass lists literally just one ability, which makes no sense. Normally you're seeing multiple ability changes and a spell list. And that ability is an action to make an ally get an aura that makes them deal 1d4 radiant damage to anyone who hits them with a melee attack. If this is actually the implementation, this is hot trash, right? D4 is the smallest dice you'll ever roll in D&D, and it doesn't scale from what it reads here. A full action to give someone this aura is really bad. Possibly it will be a very long duration aura, in which case you would actually cast this outside of combat before going into combat, but still a weak damage retaliate that triggers only once you've been hit is a pretty weak class ability by and large. I'm not sure if there's a good description of the restrictions here on this page. No, but there are some bigger like restrictions of that. Let's see if I can just find a flavor of that for you guys. So yeah, here are some examples of oath-breaking actions. Oath of Devotion: attacking a non-hostile creature, refusing to defend someone who is obviously in need of aid, or deceiving your enemies, e.g. negotiating a peaceful resolution then attacking anyway. All will break the oath. I hope it prompts you loudly and repeatedly inside the game if we are choosing to break oaths. I don't mind it as a mechanic if it's well implemented for the player to interact with and can be fun, but it's pretty penalizing in general to break your oath as a paladin and lose all the god stuff. So we'll have to see what that actually means. And I guess there's a mechanic for regaining that. Maybe this will be fun, but this is feeling really RP heavy and really light on mechanics, which is not always what I like in my D&D characters. All right, let's take a look at the Oath of Ancients. And again, the progression of the half-casters is such that your class features are going to be showing up not all the time, right? You choose subclass at 3, which is fairly late, and then your subclass features are at 7, and then there's one, I guess that probably doesn't actually apply to this build at all, because I think the characters end at 12 in Baldur's Gate 3. But the point of that being that if these seem a little barren, it's because there aren't a lot of times where the subclass features are kicking in, because the Paladin is A, so rich in class features to begin with, and then B, gets a number of these things on the starting one generally, and then has spell progression. So we'll see. Holy Rebuke doesn't seem like enough to define a class, but maybe the oath and the restrictions on movement of types of actions you're supposed to do is maybe going to make this different. I'm not entirely certain how that's gonna work. All right. Anyways, Oath of Ancients. What does this one do for us? It gives us Healing Radiance. Healing Radiance is an action that heals my allies. Call upon your oath to let nature heal all nearby allies. A 1-turn, 2 healing. Radius 3, no effects on undead and constructs. I can't imagine it's as bad as this. It says bonus action right here, it says action right there, getting some contradictory information about it. Not sure what to make of that. In base D&D, Oath of Ancients has a lot of interesting things to do with later on resists and early on things like having power over the Fae and this kind of thing, right? So I'm not sure. The other thing I'm seeing that's kind of different than base D&D is whatever an oath charge is does not exist in D&D 5e. Paladins use a combination of unique abilities, lay on hands, and channel divinities to do their stuff. So maybe an oath charge is replacing channel divinity, but in which case the normal things that these subclasses should have aren't being listed here. And that may be because they're not in the game, or maybe because they're just not listed here. So unfortunately, a little bit of a dearth of information here to actually get any useful conclusions from this. It almost doesn't matter, honestly. The core Paladin class is so good that the oaths are just going to be kind of additionally cool things to do with them. Now, and I'm kind of curious, for example, what does an Oath of Ancient Paladin do differently than an Oath of Devotion? Like, what are the penalties here? Killing a non-aggressive animal or choosing an attack dialogue option with more peaceful options are available. So these are going to be pretty restrictive. Choosing an attack dialogue when there are more peaceful options available. That is a very big restriction. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see if the RP element added by these paladins are worth the downside of these oaths. All right. Next thing I want to look at, let's look at the Oathbreaker portions. There's apparently 3 abilities here. I don't know yet if these are related to which subclass you break the oath with, or if you get access to all 3, or exactly how this behaves. Oh, it actually tells me right here. This is just actions so far in the early access, I guess. You can claim your oath at any time. Talk to Oathbreaker Knight at camp. Tell him you want to restore your oath. He'll ask you to pay 2,000 gold in order to restore it. That's good to know as well. Yeah. So not entirely certain all the actions that triggered the oath breaking, but these 3 abilities here actually seem better than the oath-based abilities we start with. Spiteful Suffering looks like a dot. Sleep an enemy in the darkness that churns within you. The target takes 1d4 plus 3 necrotic damage each turn, and attack rolls have advantage against that character. And it's a charisma save, which is pretty decent rather. The second one is Control Undead, which is use the power of your oath to gain control over an undead creature. That's pretty decent as well. Doesn't say any. It does show a wisdom save here, so perhaps that is resistible. It uses Oath Charge again, and then Dreadful Aspect, which is a AOE fear, which also seems pretty decent. Which is hilarious that initially reading these makes me think that these are better than the subclasses. I just don't think these are full lists of the subclasses. It would make no sense to be that limited. I don't mind them taking Channel Divinity and calling it Oath Charge or whatever it's going to be, but I do hope we get to see some impact of that in the game. All right. The final one talking about here, the final subclass available to Paladins listed here is the Oath of Vengeance subclass. When you take this oath at 3rd level, you gain the following 2 Channel Divinity options, which makes me, let me just double check. I think this means that they're just reading from D&D as opposed to actually showing us these classes, because I'm pretty sure I wanted to just double check. Yeah, let's see. There's the Paladin. So Vengeance is new. That means it's not in the early access, which means this is almost certainly generated just from listing out what the old D&D rules are for the core system, right? So not the Baldur's Gate specific stuff. And that's why it's using the Channel Divinity language as opposed to the Channel Oath language. And this is the type of thing I'm expecting to see for each of the subclasses that isn't being listed there. So I don't know if they chose to simplify Paladins, but this is generally what happens. The Channel Divinity is changed to do different things compared to what Channel Divinity does on the core Paladin, and each of those is specific to a subclass, but I'm not actually seeing what that's going to be here. So I think this is almost entirely to be determined, because this could be anything with the way they've changed these. Since we don't have Channel Divinity charges, maybe they've just been renamed, maybe they're functionally different, and it's not clear that this is actually what's going to be in the game. This is just what's been in previous versions of 5e, not necessarily Baldur's Gate 3 specifically. All right, so my kind of summaries on Paladins: really nice core class, lots of utility as kind of a support, as a damage dealer slash frontliner with some supporting impact of this. Often really impacted by the lore side of your gameplay. So the actions you take and the interactions you have with characters matters for the mechanics of the class, which is pretty rare. A lot of the other classes, the mechanics are independent of the kind of role playing you're doing with that class. And that the subclasses are generally fairly impactful on Paladins, and here it's not clear to me if they will be or not. Tough to multi-class into, but a nice class by and large, and possible to do some of your face stuff for the party, a little bit of the talking stuff if need be. I really like this class. Let's hope they have implemented these O's in an interesting way. And sorry, there just isn't a ton of information exactly on how these are going to behave quite yet. So anyways, let me know what you guys think.